The police stopped a black woman for no reason but froze when her husband showed up with a badge. The sound of Las Sirenas cut through the silence of the night. The red and blue lights flashed in the rearview mirror, reflecting on the face of Camilla Johnson, who gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her heart raced, but she kept her calm, wearing an elegant navy blue dress, discreet earrings, and impeccable makeup. She had just left a charity event to raise funds for a community center, a night of partying and hope, but now everything was about to change. She looked at the speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't committed any infractions. Why did they stop her? Camilla took a deep breath, trying to contain her anxiety. She remembered what her husband Samuel Johnson had always told her: if he ever stopped you, keep your hands in sight, speak calmly, and ask for explanations. He was the new police commissioner of the city, someone who fought for justice within the system itself. But would that change something? That night the policeman approached with a firm step, his hand resting on the holster of his gun for no apparent reason. His gaze analyzed Camilla from up down, and his expression was impassive. Documents and vehicle registration. His voice was cold, without any courtesy. Camilla did exactly as she was ordered, handing him the documents with slow and calculated gestures. Good night, officer. Is there a problem? The man ignored her question and took the examined papers with a suspicious look. After a few seconds he said something that froze Camilla's blood. We have received a report about a car with this description involved in suspicious activity. Camilla blinked in surprise. Suspicious activities? With all due respect, sir, I just left a charity event. There is no reason to be suspicious. But the policeman had already made his decision. Nothing she could say would change what was about to happen. Get out of the vehicle. Camilla felt a lump in her throat but forced herself to maintain her posture. She knew where this could lead, and she was not going to let him lose control of the situation. May I ask why I have to get out of the car? The policeman frowned impatiently. Ma'am, get out of the vehicle right now. The tension in the environment was suffocating. What should have been a routine approach was turning into a nightmare. Camilla, with her hands visible, slowly opened the door and got out. Another police car approached and two more officers came out. Standing near the vehicle, the first one went ahead. We are going to search your car. Camilla's stomach turned. She knew it was not the usual procedure. There was no justification, there was no reason, but there was one detail that the police did not know. She took the phone from the passenger seat and dialed a known number. Her husband answered almost immediately. Samuel has stopped me. The police are searching the car for no reason. I need you here right now. On the other end of the line, the silence lasted only a second before a firm response. Tell me where you are. I'm going there. The policeman who was searching his car looked at her with a mocking smile. Who do you think can help you now? Camilla did not say anything. She just stared at him and thought. You are about to find out. Camilla's silence bothered the police. They were used to the fear of desperation and justifications, but she just looked firm as if she knew something. They ignored the first agent, the most arrogant. He looked at her suspiciously as she searched through her bag, scattering items over the hood of the car: flyers for the charity event, a lipstick, a pair of keys. Nothing that could be remotely suspicious. What do we have here? He picked up a folder of documents. Subversive material. Camilla crossed her arms. They were looking for any excuse to justify what they already knew was unjustifiable. They are flyers to raise funds for a community center that helps disadvantaged youth. But please continue. You may find some danger in them. The sarcasm did not go unnoticed. The policeman closed the folder tightly and put it back in the car. He was beginning to get annoyed by her posture. Don't try to make it funny, lady. We are doing our job. The other policemen exchanged glances. The situation was getting out of hand. They did not expect this approach to become a public spectacle. Some cars slowed down to observe the scene. A couple crossed the street, watching the approach with Clara distrust. It was then that Camilla realized that the tables were beginning to turn. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. Can I call my lawyer now? The older police officer stepped forward. He realized they had made a mistake. It's not necessary. We're just doing some routine checks. So why did they search my car without consent? Silence was the answer. Camilla's gaze was piercing and incited her. The policeman's comfort grew by the second. It was then that the screeching of tires broke the tension. A black SUV stopped abruptly a few meters from the scene. The driver's door opened and Samuel Johnson got out. He didn't run, he didn't scream. He walked slowly, each step measured. A man in complete control of the situation. He wore an impeccable suit, but that wasn't what was attracting attention. He had the police commissioner's badge pinned to his belt, shining under the streetlights. The policemen froze. The color drained from their faces. Samuel looked directly at Camilla as if he wanted to make sure she was okay. One look was enough. Then he turned to the officers with a serious and implacable expression. Can someone tell me? Why is my wife being treated like a criminal? The team leader, who until a few seconds ago was dripping with arrogance, now looked like a man about to swallow his tongue. Sir, we didn't know. Samuel raised his hand, cutting off the excuse before it began. You didn't know? Then explain this to me. What was the justification for this approach? Why did they search her car without a warrant? What stops him from making a phone call? Silence, the kind of silence that only occurs when there is no excuse that can save the situation. Samuel took a step forward, standing a few inches from the team leader. You feel powerful now. The policeman looked away. The dynamic had changed completely. The police commissioner was in front of them, and now they were the ones under investigation. The tension became unbearable. It was then that Samuel gave the order that would change everything. Bring the supervisor now. The agents hesitated. I said now. The youngest of them picked up the radio and muttered something. In a few minutes a new car arrived, and with it the man who would decide the fate of that approach. The tires of the patrol car screeched on the asphalt when the supervisor arrived. Lieutenant Carlos Whitman, a middle-aged man with years of experience, got out of the vehicle with an indecipherable expression. His eyes quickly scanned the scene. Camila motionless next to her car. The police officers visibly tense, and right in the center of it all Samuel Johnson. The police commissioner realized that something was very wrong. Samuel kept his gaze fixed on the lieutenant, but he didn't need to say anything. Whitman himself realized the magnitude of the problem. He swallowed and went straight to the team leader. What's going on here? His voice sounded lower than usual. The police officer leading the approach cleared his throat. Still nervous, we received a call about a suspicious car. It matched this vehicle, so we approached. Samuel crossed his arms. His presence grew more imposing by the second. And what were the criteria to consider this car suspicious? The silence fell like a stone. And why did they search the vehicle without consent? Why did they prevent my wife from making a phone call? The police officers seemed smaller now. The authority they had displayed minutes before had completely disappeared. Whitman turned to Samuel with the weight of responsibility clearly reflected on his face. Commissioner, first allow me to apologize for what happened. I'm sure everything can be clarified. Samuel frowned. He didn't want an apology, he wanted explanations. Listen carefully, Lieutenant. If you hadn't arrived in time, what would have been the result of this approach? Would you have found an excuse to stop her? Would you have used unnecessary force, or would you have simply left her walk away as if nothing had happened after humiliating her? The lieutenant opened his mouth, but hesitated before answering. He knew that any justification would sound like an excuse. Camila, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. Her voice was firm but full of indignation. This happens every day to people like me. People who don't have a husband with a badge, but this time you have to target the wrong person. The police couldn't hold their gaze for long. The truth was he was exposed in the middle of the street before all the gazes that were gathering around the scene. Then the inevitable happened. One of the spectators who had stopped on the other side of the street raised his cell phone. He was recording. In fact, several people were doing it, and that changed everything. The recording was already being broadcast live. The incident that at first seemed like just another police abuse that went unnoticed was now a public spectacle, a reflection of what so many people faced daily. Whitman realized that the situation had reached a critical point, that recording could end professional careers, tarnish the reputation of the department, and start a crisis that would go far beyond. That night he took a deep breath and finally made a decision. Commissioner Johnson, I assure you that this procedure will be reversed. Immediately the officers involved will be temporarily removed while we conduct an internal review. Samuel raised an eyebrow. He was not convinced. There is not going to be an internal review, Lieutenant. It is going to be a public review, and I want it resolved now. The officers paled deeply and nodded to the men on his team. Hand over your badges and weapons. You are suspended immediately. The officers froze. This was not in the plan, but the reality was inevitable under the weight of public pressure, the cameras, and the imposing presence of the commissioner. There was no escape. One by one the officers removed their badges and handed over their weapons. The public began to murmur, some suppressing smiles of satisfaction. This time not only was justice promised, but it was done. But Samuel knew it was not enough. He stepped forward and looked directly at Whitman. This does not end here. I want a press conference tomorrow morning. The department has to respond to this abuse, and this time it will not be with empty apologies. The lieutenant nodded with resignation. The fate of those officers was sealed. Camila finally felt like she could breathe, but she knew that this moment it wasn't just about her, it was about everyone who had been through the same thing and had never had the chance to defend themselves. She looked at the crowd surrounding her, at the cameras, at the watchful eyes that witnessed it all, and she knew that this was her chance to change things. The crowd surrounding her was still in shock, whispering amongst themselves, holding cell phones and commenting on what they had just witnessed. The police officers involved now without badges or weapons looked completely defeated. They had gone from absolute authority to being a public example of what happens when power is abused. But Samuel Johnson was not finished. He knew that this moment could not just be about his wife. Yes, Camila had been humiliated, but how many other people had gone through the same or worse without a camera to record it, without a husband with a badge to defend them? Samuel picked up the phone and dialed a number. I want a press conference in front of the police department tomorrow morning. No excuses, just transparency. The response on the other end of the line was brief, almost reticent. Are you sure, Commissioner, this could lead to an institutional crisis? Samuel smiled sideways, but his eyes were cold. The crisis has already started. Now we are going to decide if we want to face the truth or continue pretending that everything is fine. He hung up. The moment was now. He turned to the crowd, and before the first question was asked, he spoke directly to the cameras. I want everyone to understand something very important. What happened to my wife today happens every day to countless people. who have no one to defend them, ordinary people who pay their taxes, who respect the law but who because of their appearance are treated as suspect from the first moment the murmurs stopped. Everyone was listening. Camila looked at Samuel with pride. He was not just solving a problem, he was changing the game. Today these officers have been, tomorrow the department will have to answer questions it has avoided for too long. No longer sweepers this problem under the rug. The applause began little by little. First some in the crowd, then the motorists who had stopped to watch. In a matter of seconds the street was filled with a roar of approval, but Samuel knew that words were not enough. Action was needed. He turned to Lieutenant Whitman. This is what is going to happen from now on. The lieutenant nodded, awaiting his orders. Samuel then announced the measures he would take immediately. All officers involved would be publicly investigated and the community would be regularly informed. New protocols would be implemented to avoid approaches based solely on suspicious perceptions without concrete evidence. Body cameras would be mandatory and periodically reviewed, ensuring that all police interactions were recorded. A community committee would be created where ordinary citizens could raise their concerns directly with the department. Whitman nodded, clearly understanding that this was the new way forward, but Samuel was not finished yet. He turned to the suspended officers who remained with their heads down. If any of you still believe that you have done nothing wrong, ask yourselves, if I were your mother, your sister, your daughter, would I accept this deal? The men did not respond. None of them had the courage to look Samuel in the eye. The crowd erupted in more applause, but the strongest moment was yet to come. Camila, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward and took Samuel's hand. She looked at the officers and then at the cameras. Not only want justice for me, I want justice for all those who have gone through this and have not had a voice. Look directly at the target of a or from the recording cell phones. If you have lived a situation like this, tell your story. Do not be afraid. Silence only protects the wrong ones. The crowd vibrated. Samuel and Camila had managed to turn a moment of pain into a movement for change, and in that instant, while the people applauded, he recorded and shared the scene. Samuel knew one thing: that night would not end there. It was only the beginning. This story is not just about a couple who face police abuse. It is about all of us. How many times injustices occur and no one sees them? How many times people are silenced because they think that no one will listen to them? But change begins when someone has the courage to stand up. If you believe that this story needs to be told, share this video and subscribe to the channel, and never be silent in the face of injustice, because together we can change things.